We are finishing up section 5.3 today by talking about animal reproduction and animal growth and development. All animals reproduce sexually during their lives. Now we do want to add in that some can use asexual to grow and to do what we call regenerate. For example, the earthworm can regenerate or regrow part of its body if it's lost. So animals can use asexual reproduction for some things, but they produce offspring. They reproduce using meiosis. They use meiosis to make sperm and egg, which then must combine during fertilization. Some organisms, like earthworms, are what are called hermaphrodites. Hermaphrodites make sperm and egg on the same body. So they're not male or female. Earthworms come in just one form, but they can make sperm and egg on the same body. However, they still have to exchange gametes with another organism. So they can't sexually reproduce all on their own. They still have to find a mate, but any earthworm will do. If you are an aquatic organism, you use external fertilization. External means outside. So they release the gametes into the environment even without finding a mate. So for example, frogs will actually release, the females will deposit the eggs, and the males will swim by and deposit the sperm, and the two never actually have to meet. Land organisms use internal fertilization. Next to internal, well, where it says the fertilized egg is more protected, this means it will not dry out. So if you live in an aquatic or water area, then the eggs and the sperm will be fine. They won't dry out. But if you live on land, land animals use internal fertilization. This requires finding a mate, but the fertilized egg is more protected. So when we talk about reproduction, animals use sexual reproduction, but they do have adaptations to help them perform in sexual reproduction in different ways. The embryo, the fertilized egg, the sperm and egg are now an embryo. It develops into an organism during growth and development. Some organisms, like fish and insects, produce many offspring in the hopes that some will survive to maturity. If you think of mammals, they, for example, humans, they make a much smaller number of offspring. So fish and insects produce a huge number of offspring, and that is an adaptation. So we want to put a star by it. Even though you didn't write anything, it's still important to know that some organisms produce lots of offspring. Many land organisms provide protection for the embryo. Some, like reptiles and birds, lay eggs, while others protect the embryo internally in the placenta, like mammals. So as the embryo grows, some animals protect that growing embryo. Reptiles and birds lay eggs, but others, like mammals, some mammals have a placenta. That's the sac that your mother carries you in. Inside of her uterus, there's the baby, but the placenta is the sac that surrounds the baby. As the organisms grow, their bodies experience changes. Organisms like insects and amphibians go through a whole body change called a metamorphosis. So insects and amphibians go through a metamorphosis, which is an adaptation that allows them to live in different habitats. Think of amphibians living in water and on land. The tadpole lives in water, the frog lives on land. Other organisms develop internally and only develop to prepare for sexual reproduction. For example, like humans. Humans don't undergo a metamorphosis. You probably know the word metamorphosis from things like caterpillar, pupa, and butterfly. The same happens with amphibians, where you have the tadpole and then the adult. For other animals, like humans, we develop internally, and we really only undergo changes to prepare for sexual reproduction. So that's growth and development. The last section is going to be on synthesis and regulation. And so synthesis really goes together with regulation, because synthesis is where we are making protein hormones. Animals use protein synthesis to make specifically shaped hormones to respond to changes in the environment and the internal body. So let's pause here and talk for a second about an example of a hormone. An example of a hormone is insulin. Insulin is there to regulate blood sugar. So the animal body has to make insulin or synthesize insulin to control blood sugar. And so when we talk about synthesis for animals, we're mostly talking about protein synthesis or making proteins, mostly hormones, which help communicate. Remember, the job of a hormone is to communicate. So, how do animals know if there's a change in the environment or a change in their body? Many animals, but not all. For example, a jellyfish has nerves, but it doesn't have what we call an organized brain. So many animals are able to use sensory organs. When we talk about sensory organs, we mean eyes, ears, nose, your taste buds. Those are your senses. So many animals are able to use sensory organs to perceive or notice changes in their environment. The senses then use nerve cells to send messages. Really, really important. To the brain, which is the regulatory center of the animal. So when we talk about controlling, remember regulate means to control. When we talk about controlling the animal body, we're talking about either movement patterns. So put a big star by movement. Animals can control their movement, or they can control their internal responses. Things like your blood sugar level or your heart rate. So when we talk about regulation or controlling, remember regulation means to control. When we talk about controlling the animal body, lots of things come into play here. First, we have to be able to notice changes. And the only way to notice changes is to use sensory organs or nerves. And so things like your eye will notice a change and send a signal to the brain. The brain will then decide to either control the movement or an internal response. And that's how the animal body regulates. And so a really interesting example is here. You have receptors in your skin that can tell touch. And that skin is connected to a nerve, which is then connected to muscles. So for example, if your skin tells that it's really cold outside, that nerve cell sends a message to the muscle cells, and that's what makes you shiver. Remember, sometimes shivering is uncontrollable because your body is regulating that for you. It's controlling it on its own. So when we talk about regulation, we're talking about controlling the animal, either its movements or its internal conditions. We have to use nerve cells to use that control. And sometimes we use hormones or chemical messengers. And this is where we're stopping the notes for today. This is actually the end of section 4.3. So if you make sure that you complete your summary box, you are done with section 5.